Welcome back to another episode of The Founder, a show that features entrepreneurs and their early stories of ingenuity, struggle, and perseverance to get their companies off the ground. We do our best to capture the uncensored, uncovered look behind the curtain into what founders really faced when getting started. I'm your host, Kallaway. My guest today is a serial entrepreneur who started his first company building custom websites for clients during his undergrad days at USC. That quickly turned into Fluid Design in 1998, an award-winning interactive agency. He also launched a Facebook-style site for moms called nesting.com in 2007, as well as Mobile Roadie, a WordPress-style platform that allowed clients to quickly and inexpensively build mobile apps without writing a line of code. With Mobile Roadie, he focused on the music industry and powered apps for Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, Madonna, Bon Jovi, The Beatles, Drake, and many others. His latest venture, Service, founded in 2015, allowed users to save money as they traveled automatically. Service connected to your inbox and automatically identified delays or cancellations from airlines and hotels, and then filed a complaint on your behalf for points, vouchers, or cash. This will be a unique episode in the fact that our founder has actually announced that Service will be shutting down in the next couple of weeks. We talk about launching and growing the business, as well as reasons for why it ultimately didn't work out. This was an inspiring interview that provides valuable straight talk around just how difficult it is to launch and scale a company. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Without further ado, the founder of Service, Michael Schneider. Let's get it. I'd love to talk about kind of like Service as a business, how it was operating. And then I know you mentioned that you guys are deciding to close up shop. So I'd love to spend like the other half of the interview talking about that and what went into that decision.
Sure. So I started Service in June of 2015. Initially, it was broader than what it wound up being. We called it on-demand customer service. And that meant that anybody could come to the website, tell us the problem they had with any company, and we'd go solve it for them. So we were doing insurance claims, we were doing Amazon late packages, cable company issues, and delayed and canceled flights. And so at the end of the day, that was the number one reason why people came to us for their travel issues and primarily their flight being delayed or canceled. And so we built software to automatically save people money and get money back in the event of a flight delay or cancellation. That eventually expanded into hotels, where we would track a hotel reservation that you booked. And if the same room dropped before you check in, get you the cheaper price.
At your peak, in terms of like usage, how many people were using it? How many claims were you processing a month?
At our peak, we probably had days where we did 3,000 or 4,000 claims a day. We had over 100,000 connected inboxes, millions of flights a month that we were tracking. Millions of emails that we were processing.
Cool. So I think that'll serve as like an anchor point. I usually like to start with the anchor point and then kind of start from the beginning, build back up. So for you, you're kind of a serial entrepreneur. So I think it would be helpful to start, kind of walk us through your life and background, kind of from childhood up until you kind of got the idea and started working on Service, and kind of reflect on some of those companies you worked on.
Sure. I was a pretty nerdy kid, always messing around with computers. And when I was 15 years old, I started selling new and used video games online. This is back when if you had the right AOL screen name, that's as good as having the right domain name or Instagram handle today. And I had used game. And so I was literally, this is like 96, so pretty early in the internet days.
Yeah.
And so I would literally go to my local video game store, write down everything they had in stock, go publish it online, sell it, go pick it up, go to the post office and ship it. It was not a very automatable, scalable business, but I loved it. I had a lot of fun. That parlayed into building websites for others. And so junior and senior year in high school, I started building websites for others. This is right before the dot-com bubble burst. And I partnered with a friend and classmate of mine, and we just started making pretty good money building websites. This would be 98, 99. After I graduated high school, I went to USC, but I was very distracted by business and just wanted to run a business and not learn at school how to start a business. And it was an incredible era where I remember with one pitch we had said, "Oh, we think this will be about $5,000 or $6,000 of work." I was like, "You know what? Let's just add a zero, see what happens." And we literally went in with a $50,000 bid, and it was accepted. And it
Wow.
was just like that kind of fever
And you're in college
pitch.
at this time, right?
Yeah, this was my freshman year in college, and so that was the era. It was like very early internet days. No one knew what anything should cost, and everyone thought the internet was going to take over the world, which it kind of has. It just happened later that everyone thought it would then. And so, yeah, I started building websites. That became a pretty sophisticated, full-blown agency. So we would create your logo, we'd build your website. Eventually, we'd make your app when the App Store launched. And I ran that from when it started around 1999 all the way up until about 2009 at the height of the financial crisis.
Okay.
And so about a year before, well, actually, things happened kind of in tandem. In 2007, I partnered with a client of that agency, and we started a website called nesting.com.
Mm-hmm.
It was like a Facebook for moms. And keep in mind, this is when Facebook was just for college students. You couldn't sign up otherwise. And so we thought Facebook's a really cool idea, but it's just for college students. Moms love to chat with other moms, get advice, coordinate play dates, share photos, etc. And so we built a website that you could do all those things. Unfortunately for us, the financial crisis totally consumed that company and any chance we had of success. And kind of out of the ashes in like 2009, mid 2009, the agency was getting really tough. The website, the Facebook for Moms site was getting really tough. We needed to raise money and couldn't. And so I somehow found about $25,000 and created what became Mobile Roadie, which was my last company. I think you probably know what WordPress is. So think of Mobile Roadie as like a WordPress, but for apps, where you could go without any experience coding or anything else and make your own iPhone app and eventually Android app. Launched that in 2009, focused on music. And within 2 years, it was pretty incredible. We powered Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, Madonna, Linkin Park, Bon Jovi, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Adele, David Guetta, just a
That's
really,
crazy.
really who's who list. And it totally took off in music. We tried to expand into sports. I almost did a deal with Mark Cuban to get him to invest. He wound up not investing, but he did give us the Dallas Mavericks. So we got him as a client. We got the Wynn Las Vegas. We powered their official app, Disney Radio, the World Economic Forum. It was a cool business. I mean, I learned a ton. Probably the most important thing I learned was that I was not charging enough to make a lot of money per app. And I was charging too much to have it get to a ton of scale. So I was in this weird middle ground where I couldn't get to scale because it was too expensive and I wasn't making enough money to build a large profitable business.
Were those people mostly buying it for the upfront build or like kind of the ongoing service?
Both. You could be live in the App Store within a few days, where before Mobile Roadie, it would cost tens of thousands of dollars and take weeks, if not months, with a developer.
Yeah.
It was a software as a service. There was a content management system behind it. We would constantly add features that you didn't have to pay extra for. We would maintain it, fix bugs, help you with App Store promotion. There's just a lot of support that you got by using the platform.
And what was like the price point if I was an artist and wanted to build my own app?
Our very first price point, I want to make sure I get these numbers right. It was something like $299 setup fee and $29 per month.
Wow.
And that included 1,000 installs of your app. And then we charged a little bit extra for each additional install over 1,000. Eventually, we got rid of the overages. I think when I left the company in 2015, I think we had 3 packages. It was like $29, $49, and $99 a month, something like that.
Pretty affordable. Like that seems like you could have been charging maybe 10x, 20x that.
It depends. It's the music industry in particular is a really funny thing. So take someone like a Madonna. You would think money's no object. It's Madonna, whatever
Right.
whatever she wants goes. And sure, if she wants it, it goes, but she's not making every marketing decision. And so when you're mostly dealing with record labels, which at the time, before Spotify really got to scale, were suffering terribly. Their business was contracting 5-10% per year. Marketing budgets were being squeezed. I remember we did an app for Drake for $1,500 for a year. And that was hard to get out of the label, $1,500. And that
That's
was when
crazy.
Drake was already big.
Yeah.
So there is not necessarily a correlation between huge brands and what the marketing budget is when you're dealing in the music industry.
Fair. And so you said you left that in 2015. Was that to start Service?
Yeah, I left that in 2015 to start Service. And here we are 4.5 years later, almost 5.
Yeah, that's amazing. So I want to dive into Service and the kind of the growth. Where did that idea come from? I read a blurb on your site that you were on a flight and kind of had heard about the woes of a customer and kind of had this spark. Is that kind of the origin story?
That's a true story. That did happen. So when I left Mobile Roadie, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And I had a list of things I thought the world needed, everything from a chain of dim sum restaurants in Latin America to a smart suitcase that since have become popular and then not because airlines banned carry-on suitcases with batteries in them, to an ad tech play. I have a whole list of ideas. And my wife actually said to me in an endearing way, you're the best complainer I know. You just don't give up when you feel like a company has wronged you. You take the time to call and wait on hold and talk to the supervisor and whatever you need to do to make it right. And you should do that for other people because you have that skill, and most people hate dealing with customer service. And I'm like, well, I don't particularly like it. I just do it out of principle. But number two, I don't want to be an executive assistant, like the world's best executive assistant. That doesn't interest me. But maybe I could build software that could solve that for people at scale. That was interesting. So that was the initial start of Service. We actually built a scraper that looked for people complaining on Twitter, which, let's be honest, that's not hard to find.
Yeah.
And would vacuum up all of the complaints and then automatically tweet at people offering help. So you kind of had this evergreen supply of people complaining about businesses. And in other words, you had an evergreen free set of leads every single hour that replenished themselves automatically.
Yeah.
So that was the very beginning.
So talk about how did the product evolve from that, Twitter scraper into more of like a platform or a portal where someone could go and either turn it on or submit a claim? How did that evolve?
So the first draft of the website I built myself in a few hours on Squarespace. It was literally an online form that I connected to Zendesk that said, "Who are you? What's the problem? Which business? And what do you want?" And that was it. When I raised money, I raised $500K in the first week that we started. And one of the reasons I was able to do that so easily is within a few days, I had a couple hundred people that had submitted claims. And so the investor was like, all right, I guess this is something that people want if you're able to literally from nothing have interest a couple hundred people in a week. And so that's how it started. Over time, we just kept getting more automated. So for a while, we had chatbots were all the rage a few years ago. And so we built this chatbot that would converse with you. And so it would ask you what you wanted and you could type back. And then we just kept automating it more, but we also kept focusing more. And it turns out more than 50% of the claims were for people complaining about airlines and their flight being delayed or canceled. And that's when we decided to focus on that.
And from like a socialization perspective, what sort of strategies did you use to try to spread the word early on?
Twitter was the main one. I would, before we built any technology to do it automatically, I would spend many, many hours just scrolling through my feed. We would monitor the feeds of people tweeting at American Airlines or Marriott or Home Depot or, the big companies in the country and intercept people upset and offer to get them help. So that was really the main way we got customers in the beginning. It was just intercepting or interjecting, I should say, ourselves into a Twitter conversation and offering to get help. And it's interesting. Sometimes we would make the mistake of leaving the company in that conversation when we'd reach out. And so the company
Yeah,
would be like, no, we got it. Sometimes people would use it to antagonize the company further. So like, oh, this sounds great. I'm not going to waste my time with you guys. I'm just going to have service handle it. So it was constantly this fine line between not antagonizing the companies too much, but making sure people got help if they wanted it.
for sure. So obviously early on you're talking to the customers and you're kind of negotiating claims on their behalf. When did you start bringing the companies like the airlines, the hotels into the fold? I know I saw in a pitch you made, one of your key kind of value drivers was there was so much you could do to benefit these companies, right? You could help like decrease negative sentiment towards their brand and help, elevate the way people thought their customer service performed. Like when did you start bringing them in as potential partners into the process?
We tried to do it from day one. I'm really a firm believer. Look, there are unreasonable people out there in the world, and no amount of training or flexibility or policies are going to make some people happy. They just want whatever they want, and nothing is going to change their mind, no matter how unreasonable it is. Service wasn't about that. We weren't about getting every single person what they thought they deserved. We were about a fair resolution between two parties. And so let's remove the 5 to 10% of people that I'll call an unreasonable bunch that it's just
Yeah.
impossible to satisfy them. So you're left with the vast majority of people that aren't like that.
Mhm.
Most people don't take the time to call into customer service or complain. They're either don't want to be bothered, they're lazy, they're busy, they don't think it's going to matter. That's really bad for the companies. So then what you get is you have the squeaky wheels, the people that do decide to call in and take the time, but aren't unreasonable. And so that was the first batch that we tried to help. And then we tried to expand it into people that may not normally call in, but might. If you're the CFO of a company and you're kind of old school and you look at this and you're like, damn, these service guys are just costing me money.
Yeah.
These people never normally call in. Our models predict, 2% of people would complain, and now 20% of people are complaining. This is terrible. But if you're the CMO and you're not, you're fairly progressive, you're fairly modern about this, you're like, if I upset a customer and that customer, for whatever reason, doesn't like my normal channels of customer service, and there's a third party that can get to them to, number one, calm them down and empathize with them, and number two, help resolve it and be a middleman, that's actually a good thing for my brand.
Right.
And so I did my best to try to convince businesses. We got the pushback a lot. We don't need you. People can just call in directly. We'll take care of them. We don't need you interfering with our customer relationships. Also, what we tried to explain is some people by their nature are not confrontational. They don't want to call customer service and get into it with them. They're
Mhm.
much more comfortable with a third party doing it. And the good news is the third party can make the brand the hero. So if Delta does the right thing, I can go back to you and say, hey, Delta really came through. Here's a $200 voucher. And you feel great about Delta. You're
Yeah.
happy with service. That's a net positive. And maybe that customer never would have taken the time to call Delta in the first place.
Yeah. So early on, it was a struggle. Did you ever have a inflection point where you were able to get these big brands to like at least recognize you as a valued partner in that service chain?
I don't think we were ever recognized, unfortunately. I think we got to the point where there was a healthy detente, where people were not, businesses were not fighting us. They may not have been working with us proactively, but they weren't fighting us anymore.
Mhm.
2016, as we started to get to scale, there were a couple airlines that fought back very strongly against us and tried to do everything they could to make our lives more difficult. What they didn't realize, I actually remember a specific example. I think this was 2016. Delta had asked us to have the messages they send go directly to their customers. We said, okay, fair enough. So we started filing claims with the customer's email address instead of an email address that went through us.
Mhm.
But then Delta went through a phase where they really didn't want to work with us. They wanted to completely cut us out. And so they started sending out these emails saying, we can't verify your claim. You need to contact us directly. But the problem was that was going to their customers. it got to a point where they were upsetting their customers by messing with us.
Yeah.
And we saw, because we had a connection to the inbox, we saw several customers writing in very upset. And so anyway, it was I think a good lesson for everybody. And I would say for the last few years, again, I don't know if airlines appreciate what we did, but I think they started being antagonistic as well.
And talk about the business model. So I know as you were evolving, this is something you started off giving away for free and then took a percent of the claims found. How did that evolve, and like what was the customer reaction there?
So in the beginning, we had no business model. We were just doing this to learn, gather data. In 2017, we started charging 30% of whatever we saved you. And then in 2018, we added a subscription option where you could pay us $49 a year and keep the majority of savings. And then last year, we added another subscription option where you could pay us $199 a year and keep all of the savings. So it evolved based on a few things. I mean, as a business, recurring revenue and the predictability of it helps you build a strong base and a much healthier business. Mm-hmm. We also responded to the market. So doing deals with larger companies, they love the idea of just paying a percentage of whatever we save. There's no downside.
And what were the unit economics for a person? What's your average savings per person over time, and what's that look like?
So it depends how much of a frequent traveler you are. So if you travel a lot, on average in the first year, we got you over $300 back. Wasn't necessarily all cash. Could have been vouchers, could have been miles, could have been a combination of all three. Mm-hmm. So we had a ton of frequent travelers using the service. I want to say the average amount of flights per year was 17. Okay. In our system, which those are flight legs. So that's actually about a little over 8 round trips per year, but that's still a lot compared to the average American.
Got it. So I'm pretty fascinated by like marketing strategies, tactics, things that work that create kind of inflection points in demand. I know you mentioned, I know we talked about this before, early on, you used Twitter, you had kind of this early rabid base of people that loved the service. Was there ever an inflection point for you in terms of demand, and what maybe marketing strategy, whether Instagram ads or something like that, did you use to cause that growth?
So Instagram ads were very successful for us to a point. In 2018, we spent a lot of money. I think at our peak, we were spending about $100,000 a month on Instagram ads, and it brought a lot of people in. The challenge for us was that, and this is very specific to our business, we required an inbox connection to help you. And most people that travel frequently travel for work. And most large companies have security policies that prevent their employees from syncing their inbox for obvious reasons. So it got to the point where we could no longer find, at least inexpensively, people that were traveling a lot that were also allowed to connect their inbox. And so last year, we really started doing more on the B2B side. We would go to businesses. Facebook was our customer, for example. And anytime a Facebook employee booked a flight, we would get that flight data through the travel management company, like the corporate travel agency. We would track it. And if it was delayed or canceled, that would automatically trigger an email to the employee offering services a way to get compensation. So that's an example, but we started having to do things like that because we just tapped out on Instagram ads.
Yeah. When you think about like the KPIs that you use to measure success and like growth in your particular business, were you focused more on like new signups, money saved? What KPIs were important for you guys?
So we'd have a weekly KPI meeting, a lot of different stuff we'd look at. We'd look at the funnel. So how many people came to the website or downloaded the app, connected an inbox, put down a credit card, that whole thing. And then we'd look at that for all the different channels. So Android versus iOS versus the web. We would look at how many people subscribed versus how many people took the 30% plan. We would look at the airline success rate every week. So what percentage of claims by Delta did they pay out on? American, United, Southwest, et cetera. Those were the main things that, and the ROI. So on average, what percent of our users are seeing a positive ROI by using service?
Yeah.
And if you're on the 30% model, you haven't paid anything up front. So then it was just, what percentage of people on the 30% plan do we get more than $1 back for? And then we would track it over the different products. So how much are we saving on flights? How much are we saving on hotels?
When you think about airlines, which airline was easiest to work with? Was there one that predominantly gave you more money back for different claims?
American Airlines, for the last 4.5 years, has been the most consistent airline we've worked with. They've never tried to do anything malicious or shut us down. Their average, I want to say, was around $100 worth of compensation per claim. Never wavered that much. And the success rate was the highest of the three major airlines. So I guess if you're in a position to choose which airline you want and you want to make sure you're going to be taken care of if something goes wrong, American's a pretty good choice.
Fly American. Got it. When you think about competition, was there anything else like this from the 30% model? I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. It costs someone nothing and they're just unlocking free funds, but were there any other competitors doing something like this when you started, and how did that evolve?
Still today, there are no other competitors that can get you compensation for U.S. flights. Just there aren't any.
Okay.
The main reason for that is that there's no laws in the U.S. that protect passengers. We're kind of funny in this country. We're very customer service oriented, just culturally. So if a customer calls a company upset, the company, in theory, most companies will try to help. But from a regulation point of view, with airlines, there's no laws that protect people. There is a tarmac rule that went into effect a couple of years ago. There were these horror stories of people being on tarmac 7, 8, 9 hours stuck. So now airlines, after a certain number of hours, have to give people the option to get off the plane. They have to provide refreshments, water, things like that. But the funny thing is, if they violate those rules, the airline, it's very expensive. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines, but the airline has to pay that to the government. The passenger who is inconvenienced doesn't see anything.
Wow.
In Europe, and now in Canada, as of December, there are laws that require the airlines to give cash compensation for flight delays and cancellations. And so there's a lot of competitors in Europe because those laws provide for that. They're also very generous laws. In Europe, this goes up to 600 euros, so close to $700 in cash for a long-haul, majorly delayed flight. And it's also retroactive up to 3 years ago, in some countries even more. So the competitive landscape in Europe is crowded, but we were the only ones doing it in the US, and our software worked for both domestic and European claims.
Were you banking on some sort of legislation like that coming to the US? Because then you would have been positioned perfectly to be the provider for collection in that case.
Yeah, I think that I got asked that question a lot. Well, I got asked it both ways. Could there be a law that would happen in the US, make it similar to Europe? And also, could the airlines just stop paying out altogether? So there's no legal obligation, so why do they even bother? So the US landscape, first of all, in this current presidential administration, I think there's zero chance that a law like that would ever happen. But the airlines, long term, I think it could. The Canada just did it. That's our closest trading partner. And so I think that long term, it probably will happen. Short term, the airlines have a incentive to keep the complaint volume low. If there's too many complaints to the Department of Transportation, that puts pressure on Congress to start doing something. And then it could have a cascading effect where you get a law here in the US.
Yeah. I want to shift to kind of funding. So I know you said you raised $500K fairly easy in the first week, but there's people listening, hopefully, that are kind of either aspiring entrepreneurs or early in the journey. And I'd love you to impart your wisdom in terms of fundraising. What was your approach? Kind of what worked, what didn't work?
Yeah, so Service as a whole, we raised over $7 million, but we did it in chunks. It was kind of an atypical thing. So we raised $500,000 in our first week. The person that wrote the majority check was an investor that wrote one of the first checks in my last company.
Okay.
So obviously, if you have a personal relationship, that always helps. And then Founders Fund led a $3.1 million seed round in the fall of 2015. And then in 2016, we didn't raise any money. But in 2017, 2018, and 2019, we did a series of extensions on the seed round. I wouldn't recommend this path. it's, those were just flat rounds. So when I say extension, the valuation stayed the same since the fall of 2015. But the flip side to that is Founders Fund gave us a very generous valuation in 2015. And so we were kind of growing into it. I think fundraising is actually pretty simple. Personal relationships by far matter the most. So if an investor knows you and is comfortable with your character, thinks you have a good work ethic, thinks you're smart, thinks you've got what it takes to get through the hard times, that's really what they're looking for. If you don't have those personal relationships, that's fine. But you just need to ideally get someone to give you a warm intro. That is the single best way. Yes, you can cold email investors or fill out the web form on their website, but in general, people respond to warm intros. It's a very people heavy business. As far as raising money, I think it's kind of a sliding scale. So in the very beginning, the very first check, it's really all about you. Does someone believe in you? Yes, they need to like your idea and the space you're in, but do they like you? The seed round, it's a little bit more metrics driven, but it's still primarily you. Is there enough signs of early progress? Is there enough there for someone to get excited about? Great. As you keep going, Series A, B, C, D, it becomes less and less about you and more about the metrics. So yeah, you need to be likable, charismatic, intelligent enough, and interesting enough space in the beginning, and then later rounds they're just going to want to see your KPIs.
Gotcha. So kind of a corollary to that, talk about your team. What type of roles did you hire for, bring on, or collaborate with early on, and how did that evolve?
In the beginning, it was me and an intern sitting at my dining room table working, and my CTO. I'm a software guy, and I was very determined to automate everything I possibly could. And so the majority of time that I spent was on hiring the right engineers and making sure the leadership was there for them to get what they needed to get done, and automating everything I possibly could. So up until last week, we had our CTO, we had 4 engineers, and then we had our director of operations and three people under him. And we never really had to expand the operations team too much compared to the volume because of the software automation.
Mm-hmm. When you were going through that process to hire, I think hiring is one of the most important things you can do. Like if you get just amazing people, it pays itself back in spades. What would you look for? Like, what are the criteria that you look for when you were bringing people on?
Hiring is one of the most important things, also one of the hardest. I don't think I'm a great hirer, to be honest. I think that I like to go from my gut, looking someone in the eyes, hearing about their background, hearing about their experience, asking them what they would have done differently in different roles or what they would do for this specific role. But I probably skew too much to personality, charisma, and storytelling compared to just being much more data-driven about it. Luckily, I'm probably giving myself a little too little credit, because I did attract a very good CTO who is very data-driven and was able to find engineers that were just great engineers, but also could communicate well and were responsible with deadlines and things like that. So I think hiring is very difficult, and it's almost like dating. I mean, you really don't know after one drink if you're going to like a person or not. You're expected with hiring to make a decision based on maybe 1, 2, or 3 meetings in person. It's tough.
It's kind of crazy. Yeah. What's the story of meeting your CTO? Did you work with him in a prior venture?
No. So my wife worked with my CTO at Fox Interactive Media. She used to work at News Corp, and he did as well. And so when I was first starting, I was on the verge of hiring actually 2 developers that, oh man, what country were they in? I want to say they were in Colombia. And I was going to send them the designs, and they were going to build out the site. And I met him for coffee and showed him everything I was about to do. And he basically told me, nothing that I was about to do was going to work very well. And appreciate that honesty. And we got into it. And initially, he turned me down, said he wasn't interested. But then he went home that night, talked to his wife, called me back, and said, "I'm in." And I guess what had happened is his wife heard the idea and totally loved it and convinced him that he should be involved.
That's awesome. So I want to shift, and I know this might be a bit painful, but I want to shift into kind of why the company is shutting down and what complications happened. I think there's a lot of people listening that would really benefit from your wisdom and candor on this.
Sure. Well, probably the biggest lesson there is make sure you have a route to profitability. We were never profitable. And in the beginning in 2015, I got some advice from one of our main investors that was like, just grow. Don't even think about revenue, just grow. And so I did. And then starting in 2017, that wasn't really working that well. I think that advice works perhaps if you're the next Facebook or the next Instagram. If Facebook or Instagram had tried to monetize in the beginning, they probably wouldn't have become Facebook or Instagram. But that is such a small, select few businesses that are able to do that and that fall into that category. So I no longer believe in just building something and just focusing on the user numbers and not even thinking about monetization. I just don't think that makes sense. Maybe you'll build the next Facebook, but a billion to one, you probably won't. And so focus on profitability, focus on revenues. I wish we had started on maybe not day one, but maybe like month 2 or 3, starting to put monetization into the product would be in a completely different place. So that was our primary problem. If you get to cash flow break even, you can control your own destiny. You're not dependent on investors constantly giving you more money every 6 months to a year. But we never did. There's good reasons for that, and we did have plans to try to change that, but ultimately we ran out of time to do that. So that would be, I think, the biggest lesson. Just focus on profitability. I think that change is hard. You get comfortable as the company continues going on. You don't want to rock the boat. You don't want to fire people. You're worried about your culture. But the fact of the matter is, if you're not willing to rock the boat, if things are not going up and to the right, and you're just exploding with growth and profits and everything else, at a certain point, you do need to make a change. And I think I probably waited too long to try to make those major changes that could have made a difference. But coming through to today, about 3 weeks ago, we had a fundraise fall through that we expected to go through. That was the first time I had raised a bunch of money for this business. That was the first time it didn't happen like we thought it was going to happen. And that immediately put us in a crisis situation with 3 weeks of cash left. And I then tried to sell the business, making it clear that the terms were very flexible given the circumstances. And about a week ago, we had an acquirer back out. They were very exposed to business travel, and their own sales were down like 70% or something crazy with the coronavirus situation. And so it was just the worst possible timing of needing to raise money and needing to sell for a technology in the travel space. Even if the technology is really cool, it's super automatable, it's super scalable, it could be adapted to use cases outside of travel. I mean, we had a lot going for us, but at the end of the day, if it's not profitable and someone's not willing to cover your losses, there's no business.
That fundraising that was supposed to come in 3 weeks ago that fell through, did they give you reasons for why? Was it a similar reason that they were overexposed in the space?
No, so that was just before the coronavirus stuff really came to a head. So the acquisition falling apart was definitely related. The fundraise was a little less clear if that was related, but it was on a platform called Seed Invest, which is like a curated angel list. And they had a high degree of confidence of success, even up until a few days before it closed. We thought it was going to happen. They thought it was going to happen, and it didn't.
Was that just going to hold you over long enough to do a full round, or was that going to be like your kind of next level?
It would have been about a $500,000 raise, and I should be more specific. It has what's called an escrow minimum, so that means we had to raise at least $500,000 to be able to keep any of the money that was pledged. And so, and that includes online and offline. So I went out and raised a couple $100,000 from our existing investors. So we needed to raise another 300 and change online through Seed Invest. And instead of 300, we raised like 180 or 190. We got close, but it wasn't enough. So all of the money that was pledged didn't come in, and the investments were canceled because it didn't hit the escrow minimum.
Yeah, man, that's tough. When you think about like how far in advance to a couple weeks ago did you like see the warning signs, and what are some of those things that you tried? And maybe one of them is increasing the monetization from $49 a month to $199. What are some of those other things that you tried in the interim?
Yeah, so it's 49 a year or 199 a year. I knew that we weren't in a good place last fall. I had been working on a series of deals. We started doing this test with Microsoft, which was very interesting. I had been negotiating with American Express for a year and a half to become a card benefit. There were these things that had a lot of potential to change the trajectory of the business. And they just took way longer than I expected. Way longer. And so in fall of last year, I was like, as long as we get these things done by the end of the year, we'll be good. And they didn't happen by the end of the year. We did launch a limited pilot with Microsoft in January, so that helped. But it just started at a very limited basis. Not a lot of revenue came in. And then American Express never launched. It was in development at some point. It was almost there. We had a signed agreement, but it just never went through by the time we were in the situation. So yeah, the things I tried to change, I mean, I tried to slim us down from a personnel point of view and cut costs. I actually went out and hired a head of business development because that's one way to get out of a problem. It's to sell your way out of it. But, she tried very hard, but the reality is that large enterprise deals take a long time to close. This isn't us. I mean, the one nice thing about Instagram ads is if today I need more customers, I can just double my budget and I'll get more customers. You can't do that with enterprise deals. And so yeah, last fall, the writing was kind of on the wall. I was hoping we'd launch stuff by the end of the year. We didn't. When January came around, I knew we had about 2 months of cash left. And so I started talking to my investors. That's how I got to Seed Invest. That was a recommendation. And I also started a parallel, actually, I'm getting the timing off. I actually started this last year in November. I started a parallel M&A and fundraise process to try to optimize the outcome. Best case scenario, we'd have enough money through Labor Day, try to get to profitability. Worst case, we'd have a soft landing for the business and not just turn off the lights.
Yeah.
That was the idea.
So what happens to the IP, right? Do you still own that? And I get that it's turned off now, but in the future you could turn it back on with more funding, or what happens in this close of business process?
Right now, the IP is owned by the company. The company still exists. We're in the process of dissolving it. Everything's backed up. So in theory, if someone wanted to come and turn the lights back on, it would take a while to configure everything, but they could totally do it. I'm still talking to people. In fact, I had a call just before this with people that are interested in the assets. So maybe we'll sell the domain name, maybe we'll sell the brand, maybe we'll sell all of it. The chance for someone to come in and continue to operate the business is probably gone. In terms of me and my staff continuing to run the business. Last Friday was everyone's last day on payroll. But yeah, we'll see if we can, salvage the assets for anything.
What were you hearing from customers like towards the end? Was their sentiment and like feedback it was still consistent with what you were hearing before? This was just an operations problem or just a funding problem? Or were you also hearing things that were new and started to be new problems to solve?
Do you mean in the last week or so?
Yeah, or the last like month or ish when it started to either raise or try to sell.
So customers really didn't notice anything was wrong or different because we didn't tell them and we were still in operation until last Monday. Last Monday, we did an email blast to 140,000 people on our email list announcing that we were closing as of Friday, a few days ago. And it actually was probably one of the most emotional things about this whole thing because we started getting people writing in, oh, you're my favorite service. You save me so much time. This is the only app that matters on my phone. Like, we had this sort of outpouring of grief from people that wanted us to continue. The grief is great. Unfortunately, it doesn't pay the bills, but makes you feel
Yeah.
a little better. We also had people, like I had a couple people come in and say, what would it cost to keep going? I love your service. Maybe I could be your partner in it. I mean, it brought all sorts of things out of the woodwork. So yeah, last week was a huge emotional roller coaster with, announcing we were closing, and then people interested in potentially working with us, partnering, investing, acquiring, and then ultimately all those options didn't work and led to us closing last Friday.
Yeah. Where do you think this leaves you? What do you want to do next? Is it too fresh, or have you given thought to that?
I haven't had time to decompress and restore any of my creative soul. Yeah. Um, I'm an avid cyclist, and so I've been taking these long biking is about the only thing you can do right now with the coronavirus situation that's allowed outside. And so I've been going on these. Yesterday I rode 40 miles over 3 hours and just like trying to clear my head. But I'm still in the thick of turning things off, shutting things down, winding things up cleanly. I learned a lesson 20 years ago with a different company that I didn't wind down cleanly, just kind of abandon it. And that's never a good idea. So this time I made sure we had enough cash to pay almost all of our bills, talk to people if we couldn't pay them, and just do things kind of the right way. So I'm in the middle of that. I think probably in the next week or two, if anything is going to happen with the assets, that will happen. And then that will probably give me the mental space to start thinking again. I might take a little bit of time off. I might not. But to be honest, I don't have like a single idea right now in my head. I've just been focused on shutting this
Yeah,
down.
fair. In terms of like words of advice to, let's say there's another founder out there listening that's, you know, 3 months, 6 months ago from where you were, and they're facing this challenge, what would you say to them?
I would tell them not to posture too much. I don't think I did this, but I think it's a common mistake. And um, if you're really down to the wire, I would be honest with people. Here's the interesting thing. If you come in from a sales point of view, right? If you come into a car dealership and you say, I have to have this car, I'm not leaving without it, just tell me what it's going to take. That salesman is going to, add a zero to everything, right?
Yeah,
Um, if you come into the car dealership, it's the last day of the month, person wants to make their quota, and you're like, yeah, I've been thinking about this car. I don't know, probably not. And you kind of like walk out. It's the reverse. What's interesting about business is if somebody wants to work with you and somebody wants to be your partner, wants to operate the business, wants to keep your team together, they actually have a lot of incentive not to rape you. If they give you a bottom of the barrel deal where you feel horrible about it, even if you take it because it's your best option, they're going to have like a disgruntled, grenade that's
yeah,
in their company. And so I think that it's really important to recognize that there's no shame in telling someone, not that I wouldn't say you're desperate, but that it's a very serious situation, that you share how much of cash you have left, how many months or how many weeks. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that because, again, the incentives are aligned to not make you feel horrible and get a fair deal in place. So if you're me 3 or 6 months ago, especially, I mean, there's no precedent for what's going on right now with economies being shut down completely. But I would just make sure not to have too much pride about it and be as honest as you can. And if somebody makes you a horrible offer, I think that says everything you need to know.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely not fun to play the like woulda, coulda, shoulda game, but it'd be interesting to see if you could take coronavirus out, how things would be different.
If I could take coronavirus out, I think we likely would have been acquired. So, um, yeah, but I mean, this applies. It's not just about coronavirus or the travel space or whatever. Like this applies to any business that's struggling. And I thought a lot. This is another thing. I thought a lot about the recurring revenue was almost enough, very close to keep the lights on with me and maybe one other person. And I thought a lot about that 3 months ago. Like, should I just fire everybody And I decided against it. And the reason I decided against it is I've done that before. I have had a company that's basically Walking Dead. And yes, you save the company in theory. Yes, the company continues, but it's paralyzed. You can't invest in anything new. It's wounded badly from an investor point of view. So you go and try to raise money, and everyone's like, "It's you and one other person, and what are you guys doing?" And
Yeah.
it's just it becomes something that time is your most precious asset, and it wastes time. So I wanted service to be something where I could keep it going with the idea that we could make the investments we had to in the future or not. But I didn't want to be in the middle.
Gotcha. Okay, let's do a little bit of a rapid fire round, because I've got a bunch of these topics that I'm personally super interested in. In the bit of experience I have with startups, I think a lot of good ones have some form of like either informal or formal advisory board that they lean on and kind of go through strategic decisions. Did you have that, and what type of people did you have on that?
I did have it. Um, we had a gentleman that used to be the chief commercial officer of American Airlines. So he knew the airline industry inside and out, could advise me there. Um, Jared Leto was one of our advisors. He helped me with marketing and creatively thinking about the business. Um, we had a couple other. One of my most amazing advisors was one of the original Uber employees that did a lot of the credit card deals for Uber. So when I wanted to work with American Express, he knew exactly who to call and could get the meeting. I tried to find advisors. I always try to find advisors that are experts and well known in whatever field I need. So it's probably not that hard to get somebody from American Airlines to be an advisor, but if you can get somebody that was at the top to be an advisor, that's something I learned from my last company from one of my investors. He would just any problem he had a relationship with the CEO, even very large companies, and it's not necessarily the CEO that solves it, but if they warm intro you to someone in the company to solve a problem, that always bodes really well, and that thing gets done. So yeah, so I tried to find the highest up level advisors I could with the different expertise that I needed to be successful.
Gotcha. Let's do one thing that you know now that you wish you knew from the service journey, and then we'll do one from your whole kind of life as an entrepreneur.
Well, I think I already said from the service journey, monetize. Don't be so dependent on investor dollars. As much as people might like you, as much as they might see signs of progress, it's very hard to keep going back to the same people and asking for more with not that much change.
And then anything poke out from like if you look across kind of all the several companies that you've started and run, any like trends that you've seen over time as you look back?
They've all been so different, and the world's been so different each time. Um, I guess what's interesting is my website design business survived the dot-com bubble bursting, but it was hard. The Facebook for Moms did not survive the financial crisis. Mobile Roadie was born out of the financial crisis. Service did not survive coronavirus. So it, I think one of the hardest things to realize is that you can't really control timing. And timing is so important, no matter how talented you are, how much money you've raised, how good, et cetera, et cetera. And um, so yeah, I don't know if I have a better overall conclusion other than timing is really important and it's out of your control.
Yeah. Talk about so I think you're a perfect person to answer this, founder mentality. So do you think there's some key characteristics of the founders that you know that kind of bubble up to the top when you think about what makes a good founder? What do those look like?
I think being a founder is one of the hardest professional jobs in the world. Take out, first line responders and terrorist attacks or nurses and doctors in hospitals dealing with the coronavirus. Let's take those people out in business. I think being a founder is one of the most brutal ways to go about your life. And the mental aspect of it is just insane. Let let me try to paint this picture. So 2 weeks ago, I knew my business was very likely going to go under. The world was shutting down because of coronavirus. So I think just in general, that's huge stress in all sorts of ways. I have two little kids that were now stuck at home that were going crazy and are still going crazy from being inside too much. And my wife is pregnant and is giving birth in May. And, we don't even want to be near a hospital right now. And so,
Right.
and obviously if service goes away, which it has, that changes our income situation and our net worth situation. So all of those things come together all at once in 1 week. And you can't go into the office and cry to your team. You can't just like curl up in a fetal position in bed and leave the lights off all day and play video games. Like, you have to deal with it, and it's really hard sometimes. I mean, I literally had in the last few weeks, I've had situations where I would have a stiff upper lip for my team and tell them I'll help them in their next career choice and whatever. And then I would go back to my desk and I'd have tears in my eyes and I'd have to keep going. So there's a lot of cliches like just never give up and just keep going. But I think being a founder is one of the hardest things. And I think that there's some sort of mental grit or mental toughness that you either have or you don't. I don't even think it's the right way to put it. You're either willing to deal with this stuff in a pragmatic way or you're not.
Yeah.
And sometimes it overwhelms you, and just know that that's okay. I mean, this isn't my first company. And so I've gotten, I think, you never get good at dealing with the highs and lows, but at least you know that the low today might be a high tomorrow, and you kind of at least know that, even if it doesn't feel that way. But yeah.
So in that same vein, talk about sacrifices like personal life. I think there's a lot of people that have great ideas and may even take the first couple steps into starting something, but then as soon as they come up against, their social life or their relationships, et cetera, they have to sacrifice. They're not willing to press it. Do you have any like example or perspective on that, and how hard has it been?
Um, Being a founder is a huge sacrifice. There's a huge potential payout, but um, you sort of lose the ability to unplug. So it's funny. My father's an attorney, and I was on a family vacation in Hawaii when I was 8 years old, and I remember my dad saying something like, "I'm really stressed out because he's a sole practitioner, and he's like, no one is in my office right now working, and therefore he wasn't making money." And I did remember that so well, and I remember thinking then, I never want to do anything that relies on me doing something to make money. I literally want to make money while I sleep, and the only way to do that is to build something that's beyond yourself, that doesn't just revolve around your skill set. Doctors don't have that. If they're not operating, they're not making money. Nurses, accountants, lawyers, many professions that are great professions. And so, but in terms of sacrifice, I mean, my wife and I celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary in November, and we went away and we're on this like beautiful island in the middle of nowhere. And I'm trying to raise money, and she's also an entrepreneur, so she's trying to raise money, and we're like on our phones on this beach in paradise with this like bathtub warm water, and that's a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice. I get jealous of people that have 9 to 5s. Really, almost no one has a 9 to 5 anymore. But I get jealous of the idea, if you're a doctor and you perform surgeries for a living and you're on a beach, maybe you're still thinking about a case in the hospital last week or whatever, but you can't do anything right then. You can't, and that
You have to unplug
you can actually
completely.
unplug. Exactly. And that's a huge deal. And I don't think I've ever been able to do that. It depends on the acute level of stress. So if things are going kind of well in the business and the balance sheet's good and things are good trajectory, taking a weekend off is awesome because you feel really good about yourself and the business, and you can like unplug for a minute. But when things are bad, it's impossible to enjoy your daughter's birthday. So
Right.
it's a huge sacrifice.
Yeah. What's funny is what you mentioned, like when you were little, you wanted to get away from like, your input driving output. Usually those are the only people that get to purely unplug because everyone else is like tied to something else remote.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
So I've got a couple more questions for you, and then there's two questions that we ask in every episode that I'll go to at the end. So one is around morning routine. So I've just kind of implemented a morning routine that I've tried to stick to consistently, and I've read that a lot of successful people do this. Do you have a morning routine, and what's it look like?
Yeah, I'm a robot. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I bike to the gym and I do about an hour of weights. These days, I got a bench and some free weights at my house, so I'm doing it here, but I'm still sticking to that routine. Tuesdays, Thursdays, I run a couple miles on a treadmill, and and I do some push-ups. So I'm working out Monday through Friday. I do that not so much because I'm worried about my weight or anything like that. It's that it keeps me mentally sane. And then the other routine for me is I gave up my car 7 years ago, and I do live in Los Angeles. This is possible. And I just ride a bicycle. And I did that not because, well, at the time it was a financial decision, but it's not anymore. I just fell in love with the way it made me feel. I love not stressing out about traffic or looking for parking or being late because traffic was different at different times of the day. And so some combination of weightlifting, running, and cycling is what keeps me mentally sane.
Yeah, I agree. I'm similar in that way. I think the people who don't do that consistently, it's crazy. That the unlock I think that you can get from doing it is
It doesn't
awesome.
have to be those things, right? Some people love yoga. Some people love jumping jacks. I don't care what it is, but some kind of physical movement that it keeps your mind sharp. And um, it's funny. I've had this experience where I've been traveling for, if it's over a week, I definitely feel it. So I'll come back after a week, 10 days, even 2 weeks, and my mood won't be as good. And the same things that I'll just be grouchier. That those things really keep me stable, and I think it's critical for anyone to find what keeps them stable.
Yeah, I'm curious. So living in LA, it's pretty ahead of the trend in terms of some of these wellness things. Have you experimented with things like intermittent fasting or trying to control for certain food groups? I know you have young kids, so it's probably tough.
I haven't. I have a lot of friends that do that stuff. Cold hot plunges, intermittent fasting, different diets. Each week they only eat one thing. Like I've kind of seen it all. Because of the amount that I cycle, I'm kind of fortunate that I can eat whatever I want, and and I don't think I necessarily crave that unhealthy things. But for me, cycling keeps me sane and balanced, and enables me to eat whatever I want. And so, no,
That's perfect.
my wife is a pesca vegan, so she'll eat fish, but then she doesn't eat dairy and doesn't eat meat, and so she's much more disciplined than I am in terms of what she'll eat. I also, yeah, I feel like I work out enough, and I literally don't drive; I just bike, and so that combination entitles me. I feel entitled to eat what I want when I want it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Let's talk about like learning and resources. So if you're going to recommend any books, any follows on social, any blogs that you read for someone starting a company, entrepreneur, or just interested in the topic, what would you say?
It's a really good question. I haven't. So I started a nonprofit last year that I've also been really passionate about. It's called Streets for All. It's streetsforall.org, and it's trying to redesign the streets of Los Angeles to make it more equitable to non-vehicle transportation. Kind of, you're in New York, so kind of what New York's been doing with bike lanes everywhere. Um, and so most of the reading I've done in the last year has been around that passion. And like I've read a book called Happy City, which I think is an incredible book about the happiness of people and how their environment relates to that. But I don't really have anything off the top of my head that I would say if you're an entrepreneur, you should go read this. I think I read Bad Blood, which is half gossip, half super interesting.
Yeah.
Um, I think that Jim Collins I used to follow a lot and read Good to Great and books like that. Um, I know Gary Vaynerchuk inspires a lot of people, but I honestly um, I've been spending more of my reading on my nonprofit than I have in the business world.
Yeah, fair enough. Cool. So last two questions that we asked every guest. The first one is the startup manifesto. So It's essentially words of advice for people starting out. So if you were to write a startup manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out, what would they be?
It's a cliche, but make sure you really like the idea and you want to do it. Um, it's just so hard. So the problem with starting something that you're not super passionate about is you won't have the stamina to get through the really hard times. That's probably the most important thing. Don't think small. So I see a really common mistake of people like, it could be a celebrity and they think, oh, I can never have a celebrity. I mean, even in my nonprofit, I was like, hey guys, why don't we get LeBron James as our spokesperson? Because he lives in LA and he loves cycling. And he's, cycled to the Staples Center for games and he'd be awesome. And everyone's like, oh, how could we possibly do that? And I think people just limit their thinking in terms of like, quote unquote, crazy ideas versus not crazy ideas. And there's nothing unique about the people that get things done with major personalities or major businesses, except they ask. And not every time it's going to work, but sometimes it'll work. So don't limit your thinking based on what you think is possible. Again, hiring, we talked about that. So important. Again, same idea. If the perfect employee is currently employed, which they all are, by the way, everyone that's really good in this world has a job. But people do leave companies. You never know where someone is at in their life. Maybe they're bored. Maybe they're ready for a new challenge. You could be hitting them right at the perfect time. So don't limit your thinking into, whether it's a co-founder, a CTO, a VP of business development, whatever it is. Find someone who's doing a great job at a great company already and then try to get them. Those would be my top 3. I already mentioned that I would focus on a path to profitability. Or if you're not profitable, it's okay, but you have to, the underlying base of the business needs to be growing like crazy that you could change some things to be profitable quickly if you had to. Amazon did this for 20 years, more than 20 years, where they were so unprofitable. And every quarter, they would tell investors, we're probably not going to be profitable. And yet people kept investing. And now, it seems like we're all going to be working for Amazon right now. With they're hiring 100,000 people, and a lot of people are losing their jobs. So focus on profitability, or I guess the flip side to that is just don't ignore monetization for too long. Mm-hmm. That's only 4, but that's probably what I would say right now.
All right, we'll leave it at 4. And then the last one is nomination. So it's your turn to nominate another founder that is a friend, colleague, or mentor of yours that you'd like to see on this show.
Do you know Joe Fernandez?
No, I don't think so. Well, I know of him, but I don't know him personally.
Okay, so Joe Fernandez founded a company called Clout. Sold it to a company called Lithium for a couple $100 million. Moved to LA, founded a company called Joy Mode, which is sort of the anti-Amazon, where you could rent stuff instead of buy it. And they just went through what I just went through. They were a couple months ahead of me, but he's a fantastic entrepreneur. Salt of the earth kind of guy, real life lessons, real grit. He'd be great.
Perfect. We'll have to get him on the show. Thank you. So I want to acknowledge you for a second. I think listening to your story, the tenacity that you've brought to kind of multiple businesses, and kind of getting knocked down, getting back up. It's such a cliche, but to be a multi-time founder and just keep doing it with such success, I think is impressive. And I'm personally excited to keep following you. And I think you're going to be successful in whatever the next venture is.
Thanks, man.
So not to be too preachy, but
appreciate it.
For sure. In terms of if people listen to this and want to follow along, I know service is being decommissioned, but for you personally, what's your social website? Where can people find you?
On Twitter is probably the best thing. It's just Schneider, my last name. Okay. I also have a personal website, but I don't really update it. So let's just stick to Twitter.
Perfect. Sounds good. Michael Schneider, founder of Service. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to that episode with Michael Schneider of Service. Remember, if you liked what you heard and want to support the show, there's 3 quick things you could do that would really help us out. 1, subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. 2, leave a rating, preferably 5 stars. And 3, leave a detailed review on why the show inspired you. That rating and review really go a long way in helping those podcast platforms like Apple and Spotify push our show to new listeners who might like it. I hope you enjoyed that episode and are looking forward to the next one. Until then, I'm Kallaway, and this is The Founder.